little bit about your journey and how you reached where you are today?
Sure. Well, back in the day, I was a hippie and a deadhead, and worshiping at the shrine of Jerry Garcia with shrooms and LSD and so on. And I also hadn't been in therapy a lot because I came from a difficult childhood. So it takes quite a while to unravel that. So I was kind of lost. And one year I went to 17 shows and I was just hanging out. And I saw this ad for the school for transpersonal psychology. And I realized, God, that's what I want to do with my life. Because transpersonal psychology, for people who don't know, is the combination of traditional mainstream Western psychology and all other psychologies. So we would give equal credence to Eastern religions, shamanism, body therapies, meditation. Everything was up for grabs. Every sort of spiritual path was seen as integral to a person's development. This is very different than mainstream psychology. Freud thought that spiritual search was pathological. So I'm not saying most therapists think that, but it comes from that root. So I went to the transpersonal school, the only accredited one at the time, and I got my master's degree there and began practicing. And Stan Groff, who some of you know, was one of the founders of transpersonal psychology. So part of what we studied in graduate school, even though it was illegal, was Stan Groff's LSD research in psychotherapy with people. And so we were studying that as a valid, this is back in the 80s, we're studying that as a valid form of treatment. So when I would have my private practice, I had in the very fine print, but you could see it there, that I would work with, I would help people with, we didn't call it psychedelic integration then, but that I was available to work with people who had psychedelic experiences that wanted some kind of help with that. And before Michael Pollan's book, I would get about one person a year would contact me about that. And so it'd be something like, I went to the jungle and I got totally blown out. And so we would work on that sort of thing. And of course, after Michael Pollan's book, the phone never stops ringing. So obviously it's been a big change, but there have been a lot of people around for a long time doing this kind of work. Underground, the part that I do as a licensed therapist is not underground. You can bill insurance for psychedelic integration. Can you believe that? For the licensed therapy before and after. And so for me, the journey was, and then it was gradually coming out of the closet about that, because for a long period of time, if you were interested in psychedelic research, your reputation went immediately downhill. You know, you were no longer, you're just a woo-woo person. You're just a woo-woo person. So it really was a matter of building my career. I went off, as Eva Cheska said, I was in corporate mental health for years, in corporate mental health, psychiatry, hospitals, running programs, flying around the country, doing consultation on mental health programs. And I had to keep that whole transpersonal psychedelic side under wraps. So it's really, as I got more solid in my career, I'm like, I got a resume. I don't care what you think. You can see that I'm a reputable person. I don't care anymore. I'm out of the closet, and we're doing this psychedelic integration work. So I think that's great that the whole, at least amongst the intelligentsia, that everyone's coming out of the closet about it. I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
We have this new form of, not new, but we have another form of healing that hasn't been available for a long time, at least in the conventional world.
Catherine, could you tell us a little bit about what integration means to you and why it's important from your perspective?
Well, integration, I believe it's in the Jungian concept, is about becoming whole. So it's integrating parts to become more whole. So I would see psychedelic integration as part of a person's lifelong journey to become more whole. It's a very concentrated part of it. I know for me personally, so we can if we think a little broader, for example, my most difficult integration experience of my life was trying to return back to living in the United States after living in an ashram in India for a year. it was so difficult to try to go from that experience to this one and how to figure out to make my life work anymore with the things that I'd seen and experienced and known. And that's kind of in a microcosm what a lot of people experience with psychedelics is they have such a big experience. They don't know how to integrate that back in with daily life. You know, that famous phrase, spiritual phrase of what do you do after enlightenment? You chop wood and carry water. You know, and so how do I go back to chopping wood and doing my dishes? And how does any of this matter or mean anything? Or, you know, this is what a psychedelic experience can do for us when we're just met with this great mystery and awe and wonder. So it is really, I think, experienced people helping people who are having difficulty becoming more whole after that experience instead of feeling more fragmented, which is often possible. Oh my God, I heard someone the other day at a talk say, there's no such thing as a bad trip. I'm like, oh my God, that is so disrespectful to people who have a really difficult time reintegrating. It's really a misunderstanding. So that might get some audience upset, but as a therapist, you can really see that some people do get shattered by these experiences and do need some help becoming more whole again afterwards.
So I'd like to ask Catherine, what do you see as the primary differences between an integration coach and a therapist?
Well, the primary difference is that to become a licensed therapist, there's a certain pathway you need to go on. And I'll explain that more specifically. And for integration coach, unfortunately, there is no standard whatsoever. So anybody can actually pronounce themselves to be an integration coach just because they want to. Obviously, my colleagues here have had wonderful training and experience and have walked their talk for a number of years. But we all are aware that there are people just taking a weekend seminar and pronouncing that they're now experts in this. So I think that the requirements for entry are very different. For a licensed therapist, you have to have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. Many therapists are also psychologists, meaning they also have a PhD. And I think one of the most important things is after we finish those degrees, we have to be supervised by other licensed people for 3,000 hours. Now that may vary a bit from state to state, but that means your work is being watched over, critiqued, you're being helped during that time to become better. And then someone who is senior to you in the field has to give you the go ahead that you are approved. Now, obviously this doesn't weed out, there's still a lot of lousy therapists and a lot of very good ones. But at least it's something that a consumer who's shopping can say, at least this person has gone through this kind of training. And the same is not true for people who are calling themselves integration coaches. I think it's great to really look at someone and see, you know, what their training is, what their experience is. I know with my students, I say to all my students, because as I'm supervising them to get those hours, they're making mistakes. And this is great because we do make mistakes when we're learning anything. And I'll say, you know what, it takes about 10 years to become good at becoming a therapist, becoming anything. And so say to yourself, it's going to take you about 10 years to get good at this. I don't know about you, Richard, but I feel like maybe I'm starting to get good at it now. But I think this length of time of learning your craft, learning your trade, learning your art is really indicative of the difference. Another difference is that therapists per se are not necessarily skilled whatsoever in psychedelic integration because it hasn't been legal for them to study and they may know absolutely nothing about it. So it's not saying that they're necessarily just because someone's a licensed therapist, they know anything about psychedelic integration. Yeah, I'm gonna say a little more about that from my point of view, which is that psychedelics are not for everyone. And it's very important. I know earlier in my life, I could tell I was still too mentally challenged from my family of origin to take psychedelics. I did wait till I was older, and thank God I did. And one thing that a licensed therapist can do, for example, one thing I offer to the community here I do use diagnostic categories. I find them very helpful. And so one thing I offer the community here is that I do psych evals for people who are curious whether or not they ought to take psychedelics, whether or not that's a healing for them. So guides or coaches will refer to me. And then the person, you did bring up, Megs, that there is a cost differential quite a bit between experienced licensed therapists and a lot of integration coaches, although of course anybody in private practice is going to charge whatever they can get without laughing. So some coaches obviously are expensive, but usually there's quite a cost differential. So they can come for the psych eval. Here's why I think that you're free to go, or you're, to use Paul's language, you're strong enough, you're resourced enough. In my professional opinion, it's not the best thing for you right now. You maybe ought to do some psychotherapy for a while, or get a job, or, certain types of things probably would be best for you to do first. And as an example of this, I did an evaluation like this for one young woman. I said, I don't think it's really a good idea for you right now. She was very mad and angry. And then I got an email from her 6 months later saying, thank God you told me that. Mm. Thank God you told me that, because I got my life together, so forth, and now I'm working with whomever. But I think it's really the community needs to understand that this is as much as it is an ecstatic business, and a lot of how we heal is by providing ecstasy and pleasure for people. There's also this side of people who have not processed out their dark material, and that's both coaches, therapists, and the clients. Mm-hmm. And that is very dangerous stuff to be mucking about in if you don't know what you're doing. I agree mostly. I think that anyone going into the field needs to have had psychedelic experience if they're entering it now. I think that more important than any kind of training is whether or not you've dealt with your own shadow material, because anything you haven't worked with is going to come up in the space and you're not going to know what to do with. Or you're going to be unconsciously blocking the person from their material coming up because you're afraid of it yourself. But I think there are some occasions when I have referred, I'll give you an example. Actually, I have two occasions of this where therapists or clients have contacted me seeking, they've been in therapy with a therapist that they feel good about, but they've been reading about psychedelic experience, and they would like to try that in addition to their therapy. And I feel if they have a long-term good relationship with their therapist, I've made myself available if the therapist has any questions, but the therapists themselves don't feel that they're psychedelic integration specialists, but they're in favor of their client doing this conjunctive work. And in that case, I felt really good sending the person back to that therapist with the caveat that anything you don't understand, but you have this long-term relationship that is therapeutic. I think that in that case, in cases like that, it can be quite beneficial and enough for that person. In fact, there's a person supervising the work long-term. She's going now for her second MDMA session. Of course, as a licensed person, I don't know that, but she is. And the therapist is doing the work with her, and the client's feeling really good about how that's going. I want to add to what Richard was saying, which is that I don't remember who said this quote. I'm going to have to look it up after this panel because has really guided a lot of how I think about personal growth, personal and spiritual growth, which is that if it's not making you a kinder person, then what are you doing? So if we're not becoming more compassionate to our fellow humans, if we're not having more self-love, if we're not acting better, then it's really just kind of masturbation. It's really just, we want to be able to use these experiences somehow to contribute to the human experience of a more loving place for all of us. So after enlightenment, if you become enlightened, I hope you'll spread it around.
Hear, hear.